welcome back. We've had a few days in between the last bit of video that I captured on doing the cylinder heads, and that is because I started cleaning up and really doing the really close inspection of the cylinder heads, and these cylinder heads had been built before, and so you always run a little bit of risk that they'll be in worse shape than you expected. So when I looked them over, everything, the guides were just a little too worn, the valve stems were just a little too worn, and when I did a first blush at them, I thought, yeah, everything will probably make it. But the deeper I got, the valve faces are pretty thin, and that's not really good. The valve stems are a little worn. Obviously that's not good. And then the guides had a little extra play in them. And so it just came to the point where it's like, you know what? I'm going to take them back to the machine shop, and I'm going to get guides put in it and order up some new valves. So I will kind of pick it up from there. I'll do a quick overview of the cylinder heads that I got back, just to show you what they did and explain it a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and look at building these heads and see if we can even get them on the motor today. So let's take a look at what they gave back to me. So these are the heads. I already had them cleaned and checked out, and so they took a second trip back to the machine shop, and what they did was, as you can see, they actually, down inside there, they had put bronze guides in it, and they replaced those guides with new guides, so it brings the valve stem diameter back to spec. The stems, the valve guides that were in it were actually undersized, so the engine builder probably used an undersized valve stem guide size for a slightly worn valve stem in a way to compensate and bring the heads back to spec. Lots of things happen in the engine builder world that you don't typically see as an individual. It's not bad, it's just a solution. It's just not something I could work with once I needed to redo them. Then all the seats were checked. They're all hardened, and they were checked for being a center. So the other thing, so as you can see, we've got both heads. I'm going to start building them right now. The other thing that we got was a whole box of valves. So it's, we're starting with, pop this open with one hand. So it's always nice to have brand new valves to play with. So now the edge of the other valves had gotten pretty thin right here, so that causes a problem. It has a potential to burn a valve, and so we're going back with everything being in like new condition for the most part, and we should get lots of miles and smiles out of this motor. So I'll set you back up, and we'll start building some heads. So we're going to pop out the valves. It's always so nice, doing stuff when it's, they're brand new. Everything is just so gorgeous. So we'll pop out all the valves and get them ready. I'd love to say we're using valves that are made in USA, but we're not. We don't make anything in USA anymore. So these are Argentinian valves. So I guess I'm just happy to have valves. Okay. 4 intakes. 4 exhausts. Hopefully you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So right now all I'm doing is just making sure everything's looking nice and clean, and we're gonna do some, because all of the seats have been checked, they've basically been dressed, all the valves are new, so I'm going to do a real quick check to see kind of where we're at and to see if I need to do any other work to them. That's nice. So I'm just looking, as I bang that valve, I can tell exactly where that seat is hitting the face of the valve, and it's right where we want it to hit. So we're in good shape. Okay. So far so good. So this sometimes gets a little tricky if you have a machine shop that isn't quite as careful with putting the guides in. Because what it basically does is it has the potential of moving the center of where the valve's going to ride a little bit, and that can impact how much how much work you have to do on the seat to get it to all work. These are perfect. So I use a machine shop in Phoenix area. It's actually in Glendale, called Morrison Machine. And I know none of you guys are probably in Arizona that are even viewing this, but if you have, it's really important to find a machine shop you trust and that really does quality work. And it's getting so hard now, at least where I'm at. I'm in a pretty big city, so it's hard to find a machine shop that really does this kind of work. I think, society has shifted to being, kind of, you buy a new car, you drive it for 5 years. When it engine fails, you just get a new car. So it's a little different world that we're living in. This machine shop tends to focus on earlier things too. So their area of expertise is older, kind of pre-computer, if you will. Looks good. The other thing I'm doing while I'm here is I am just paying really close attention to all kinds of details. So do I see a crack? Do I see a hairline imperfection? Is there something that I need to pay attention to right here at this stage? This is kind of the last time you're going to mess with the heads with that critical eye around the combustion chamber. So you're paying close attention to make sure everything looks good. I've had heads go back together that after they were vatted and cleaned, the cracks that had been in the motor, had been in the cylinder head, presented themselves and started leaking. So you hope that because it was a non-leaking, good kind of shape cylinder head before, that you'll be in good shape this time. But you always want to look just to make sure. Okay. All right, that looks good. Okay, the next thing that I do is get everything pulled back up and oil it up. So you're making sure your valve guides are all nice and lubricated. Okay. Now we're going to put some really nice seals on. So these seals are much tighter fit than the bonnet seals that you would get in the gasket set. So these are a little bit nicer. They have a spring-loaded retainer at the top. You probably can't see it, but there's a small spring that goes around the seal around the valve stem, so it keeps it nice and snug. They fit perfectly around the guide, much closer tolerance than what comes in a Felpro kit. The bonnet seals, the umbrella seals that come in those kits work well and so much better than what would have been on a small block Chevy back in the day, which was an O-ring because of the way the retainer was configured. But still, it is substantially better. So what I've done is I've put the intakes together, and I'm just getting ready to assemble the exhausts now. So I'm laying out the springs, the keepers, getting everything organized. One last wipe off, put these together. So far, just to go through what I've done, is I've oiled the stems, I've put the valve seals on, I've put any oil on the valve stem seals that need to happen, I have put any shims that I want to use on, and I have put the valve springs on the intakes. So now, it's really just a matter of putting the exhausts together, which set your compression tool, put it in there. Always point the valve spring away from you, just in case something slips apart. It'll shoot into the back of the bench or into the, the items over there and not into you. This is a lot about feel, so you're feeling to make sure the keeper falls into the groove on the valve. You can often hear it. Pop it in there. Do the next one. Kind of heard it click just now. That's that's the keeper sliding in against the retainer into the groove. Sometimes they fall right in. Sometimes you have to move the spring around a little bit to get it to pop in. nice little pop, and now you have one cylinder head done. So the piece that I do now is I want to look to make sure everything looks like it should look, and it appears to. I double check to make sure I got seals on every valve stem. Again, this is the last chance that you're gonna, you may find out later, but this is when you want to do your quality control. And then what I do is I just go through and I just make sure all the keepers are seated. Not very often do you have a keeper that isn't seated and causes you a problem later, but it happens every once in a while. So I do that, and at this point, flip this head up and I'll show you what the finished product looks like. So this is what the head looks like all together. Springs are all nice. Everything's clean. The valve stems are long. Everything, all these things that you're looking for to make sure that there's alignment and things of that nature are all as they should be. So nothing is glaring that is a concern at this point. So we will move forward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build the other head, and then I'll bring you back when it's time to put them on. So here we go. Okay, heads are done. Next step is put them on. As we do this, one thing that I want to make sure, if you guys are building Fords out there, which probably maybe a handful of you are, just remember that oftentimes lots of these motors require head gasket to go on a certain way, and so the head gasket will be stamped front on it. You know, that's been done wrong 1,000 times, so pay attention. Make sure your motor you're building has a head gasket that if it needs to go on a certain way, it'll tell you, it'll give you an orientation, it'll be stamped front, and just make sure you put that in right, otherwise it'll overheat right away and you won't be happy. You'll be pulling the heads back off. So we're going to put these on. The dowels, or the little sleeves that position the head, are on. Get both head gaskets on at the same time, so I don't have to, while I'm thinking about putting them on frontwards in the right orientation, it's done. I've also oiled the head bolts around the shoulder and on the threads so that I can get the head on there, slide a couple bolts in to keep it in position, and then I'll go around and impact them all in. So here we go. Okay, that gets it set there so it isn't gonna slide off. Get some more in there and started. I typically build motors on a stand that's about a foot off of the ground, and I build them vertical like this. I just like to do it that way. If they're up a little bit, you're not bending over quite so much. Build them on the engine stand is fine, but it when I was building lots of motors, it was just another process that kind of slowed me down and required me to do something. So having a metal table that was about 12 inches or so off the ground was perfect, and I just don't have it here. So kind of hanging on that lower dowel. Okay, the heads are hung on there, the bolts are all started, everything's lubed up. I'm just going to pull them up to get them seated. I do this in the same order I would do a torque on it. Do the other side. So basically what that does is it just gets everything snug down. Probably put that little 3/8 drive impact, probably put, 35 pounds of torque on those, so nothing to be too concerned about. Let me get my torque wrench now. So cylinder head torque is 65 to 72. So I'm going to set it at 72. Okay. So here's another thing that I'm pretty religious about, and that is once I start this process of putting the heads on, or putting rods in, or putting a main, putting a crank in, I don't leave until I'm all the way through the torque process, because I don't want to accidentally forget something and have a catastrophic problem. So once I start down putting the heads on, this would never be a time where I'm going to stop and have lunch. I'm going to wait till everything's torqued, and then I'll move forward. Okay, go through it again. So I did it a third time on those two middle ones because this one still took a little more to click the second time. So I just wanted to confirm that everything was maxed out. This is another kind of benefit of building them like this, is that when it comes time to torque the heads, really to torque any of the rotating assembly as well, you don't have to chase the motor around, you don't have to find a way to pull on it. So. Actually went out of sequence a little bit there. This will be okay though. Okay, there we go. Unwind the torque wrench, heads are on. Okay, so for this particular motor, I rated my parts inventory, and I had some factory Ford lifters to put in it, so kind of cool. So those are going to be the ones going in this motor. So let's get them ready. All right. Typically, lifters are somewhat oily in the bag, so very rarely do you have any problem with moisture or any of that stuff I got in there. Just let them set up here. So again, just a quick inspection. Lube them up. I have, there used to be some engine builder lube that was called PTA. I use STP as a lube. It sticks to everything and is good as you prime the motor. I prime all my motors for oil pressure before I ever start them, so I know I have good oil pressure right from the beginning. But this gives that first little bit of lubrication, and then I'll put for break-in, I'll put zinc in the motor as well, because current oils don't have any of those chemicals added that would prolong the break-in life and things like that. So I'll put some zinc in it and make sure that it has the best chance possible to break in the camshaft. If it was a roller motor where the camshaft had a cam follower, or lifter had a wheel on the end of it, you wouldn't need to worry about the zinc.
It's really the camshaft wear that pays the price if you don't do it. So the good thing about getting this motor done is it does get some of the parts out of my little engine shop here, the tool room. I've got three additional motors to build, and so I've got engines and parts everywhere, and it just makes it kind of a mess. So we're gonna get some motors cranked out. One of them is even for me, so that's nice. One's going to be the 289 for the 64 Falcon hardtop, and I just picked up a set of heads night before last to build to put on it. They're off of 66 289. The heads I had for the motor were smug heads, and so I really didn't want to build them for that motor. So I finally came across a set. They're not super rare. Maybe they are getting super rare. I was having a little trouble finding a set that wasn't $400. I'm not going to pay $400 for a set of Core 289 heads. It's not going to happen. My brain is probably still 20 years ago when I could pay 25 bucks for a Core head. So I paid a little more than that, but I got a fair price on a set of heads, and that's good. We'll get them down and get them down to Morrison Machine to have some work done on it, and get that motor built too. So I'm just going through here, a little tedious probably to watch. We'll edit some of this out. I'm lubing them up, making sure everything slides good, no problems. This part typically goes pretty fast. We're right at the tail end of the motor build, and all the critical pieces other than setting the valve lash are kind of in check. Probably had these lifters for 10 years in inventory, so good to use them. Because so many things that I have small block Fords in them, I don't really worry that if I don't have a motor planned for them that they won't get used. So if I see a good deal on them like these were, then I add them to the toolbox, to the inventory box. Okay, lifters are all in, everything's lubed. Let me get some rockers and push rods put in. Okay, so here's something else I do on a motor that does not basically have adjustable rockers. So this motor, you set the rocker arm nut down until it seats. These do not adjust like an earlier 289 or a small block Chevy do. You set them, and if everything is good, which we should be in good shape, then the amount of lash the lifter has will be enough for it to compensate as it pumps up. So because there's no adjustment, now's the time to find out if something really isn't right. So here's what I do. It's really simple. There's no spark plugs in it. I just check every hole to make sure it has compression. So as I run through it, compression. 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 And the reason I do that is if it's got compression, all the lash is going to come into within tolerance when the motor starts up. So okay, so now we know we have compression in all the cylinders. It's going to run even, not going to have more than likely any issues. I'm going to now bring it back up to top dead center. Here it comes. Okay. So I pulled it up, I felt compression, that means it's coming up on top dead center. Compression stroke, I watch the timing mark to bring it in to about 6 degrees advance. That will set me up for success when I drop the distributor in. I won't have any concerns of being 180 out or anything of that nature. Okay, that piece is done. I may have enough time to put the intake on. Okay, time to set the intake on. Here's a couple pointers. One, clean all the surfaces with something that will get rid of the oil residue. So all along this rail where I siliconed it and here and around these water ports, I clean those really well. Everything you want clean, but you don't want any oil around your sealant. The next thing I did was I put sealant on both sides of the gasket around the water ports. I don't do the rest of it. A lot of people silicone the whole thing, but for me, the gaskets do the sealing. But I don't want any imperfections or little drips from the water jacket getting into the motor. So I put sealant around here, and the other piece of note, if you're doing a small block Ford, pay attention to which set of intake gaskets you grab out of the box. They usually come with two, and one set is a later style and has a bigger water port here. So don't accidentally grab the wrong set, put it together, and create a problem that you didn't need if you would have just used the right gasket. So everything is together, gaskets are in place, there's no front or back on the intake gaskets. It's time to set the intake on. I use silicone sealant rather than the rubber gaskets in the kit because once this sets and it seals up, it won't leak over time. The rubber gasket sometimes, or the cork, will sometimes either squish out, or if they're corked, they may deteriorate, and this sealant just doesn't do that. So I've stopped even using those end gaskets. Okay, the good thing about this is it's not terribly heavy. It's heavy enough, don't get me wrong, but it's not like a 390. Okay, let's set it on. Okay, we'll start a couple bolts just to make sure that we're in the ballpark. Hopefully we are. Looks like we're close anyway. Okay. Start to spin some bolts down. Let's see if we got it lined up enough. Nice. So I'm not torquing anything down. I just want all the bolts started. Because the Fords are a little bit easier because the intake bolts go straight down, but like on a Chevrolet they go in at an angle. So you really want to get everything started before you start tightening anything up. So right now I'm not tightening. I'm not even getting down to the intake really. I'm just barely getting them screwed in. Okay, so now what I'll do, I'll go around it just like I did on the cylinder heads. You start in the center and you work yourself out to the outside. And if you're kind of gentle, it'll start to pull itself in just like it's supposed to, kind of set between the tapers of the cylinder heads, and you won't have any trouble. Yeah. The intake isn't as critical. I mean, you're not going to have probably issues, especially on an intake like this, cast iron on a cast iron cylinder head. But you do, I still follow the torque sequence. It just seems to be good practice. And you'll notice that they all were a little loose when I went back because the intake's slowly getting pulled down where it's going to live. Okay, I'm going to change to a ratchet. Got to remember these are 5/16 bolts, so you don't really need, a ton of torque on them. You just want to make sure they're all nice and snug. We're going to go around them a few times. You can tell that every time I go around it, it pulls them down just a little bit more. Exactly what we want to do. We just want to get that pulled down till as we go around they're not moving anymore. These are getting pretty close. Okay, intake's done. The pieces I'm looking for after the fact is I'm just looking to make sure I have a small bead of silicone that comes out of the back and out of the front, and that's going to build a nice seal for the two areas there at the front and the back of the valve. Okay, there you have it. One finished 302. I put the valve covers on it for two reasons. One, to keep the dust out of it while it's sitting here before I paint it, and two, because I just wanted to see how cool those valve covers looked on this motor. And once it's painted, I'll kind of give you a quick overview of what it looks like painted, and all the accessories are on it, probably right before we set it in the truck. It should look just it should just look killer. So I hope that gives you a little insight into how we're doing the motor for the 72 F100 Buffy. And I'm Clay for Chop Shop Motors, and we'll see you on the next project.